How did Egyptian hieroglyphs give birth to the alphabet?
Even in these ancient times, Egyptian monuments have been sitting and weathering for thousands of years. On their great murals and pillars, you find rows of little pictures. Sorry, not pictures, hieroglyphs, sacred symbols. But despite appearances, this isn't some mysterious pharaonic picture writing. It's consonants. 1 consonant signs, 2 consonant signs, 3 consonant signs, a wall of consonants, plus a sprinkle of logographs for determinatives. It's not that Egyptian was a harsh, vowelless desert of a tongue. It simply did not write its vowels. Imagine if you wrote this way. Would that work? And then imagine if you could add in logographs to make sure you really got your point across. Imagine you wrote like that and you're thinking with hieroglyphs. Too difficult? Fine. Off to the caves with you, where you toil away with ancient miners on the Sinai Peninsula. You and your fellow miners would find it handy to leave messages for one another, but there's no time for deep studies of rows of fancy hieroglyphs in here. You need to keep it simple if you want another major moments in the history of writing. Your characters look like scratchy, rushed version of those glamorous Egyptian symbols, but their meaning doesn't matter anymore. Nothing but consonants, and the same symbol for the same consonant every time. Take this character. In Egyptian, it means house. These Semitic miners are calling a house a bet. Acrophony, or top sounds, suggests that you can just take the first letter of a word, like the Egyptians had already been doing with much of their consonant writing. You end up with a letter for your sound, b. Do the same thing with water, which the Semitic speakers are calling mem, and you now have an sound. With a couple dozen elegant simplifications, you create a simple, reliable list of consonants, an alphabet, and you've given generations of future children the joys of reciting their ABCs. Actually, at this point in history, they're ABGDs, sometimes called an abjad or abgad, because who needs that wishy-washy C when you can just use an S or a K? After a long, hard day of mining and etching, you turn to find that someone's been watching you this whole time. She's a traitor, a Phoenician merchant who knows a good thing when she sees it. She's already made major cash in the paper business, where they turn tufty, stocky, swampy Egyptian papyrus into flat, inkable sheets of paper. She rushes back home to Phoenicia and smirks. Think of the advantage she has, keeping track of whatever anyone else tells her just by remembering about as many characters as she has fingers and toes. Old kings can keep their obtuse hieroglyphs and their stone monuments. The future of the Mediterranean. She rushes back home to Phoenicia and smirks. Think of the advantage she has, keeping track of whatever anyone else tells her just by remembering about as many characters as she has fingers and toes. Old kings can keep their obtuse hieroglyphs and their stone monuments. The future of the Mediterranean will belong to alphabets and paper. Writing is going portable. She uses this newfound alphabetic leverage to turn a huge profit across the entire eastern Mediterranean, leaving people inspired to adopt and adapt her alphabet wherever she goes. All this, and she doesn't even write you a thank you card? How hard could it be? Writing is easier than ever. It feels universal, like writing's here to stay, for everyone. But there's a peculiar quirk that's easier to spot in hindsight. You and your mining crew were communicating in a Semitic language.
Alright, I know some of you guys are going to be lost right now. They're trying to say that Egyptians created the alphabet, that we owe everything to Egyptians. If you study Egyptian writings, hieroglyphs is the newest form of pictograph and hieroglyphic languages. This is right before the transition, right? It comes from an older Semitic pictograph and petroglyph writing. which evolved and eventually in younger civilizations became hieroglyphs. And now the world's trying to teach us everything came from the youngest civilization in the Nile. So you have to realize that they're lying. The Phoenician is the Semitic person. He's the one who gave many different cultural things to the Egyptians, like the laminate bowl, like the two-wheeled war chariot. Many different things came from our Sumerian ancestors who influenced Egypt.
Language. Phoenicians, a Semitic language. All of these friendly shades of the Phoenician alphabet were being used for languages that sounded similar and were...
Okay, now they're going to say, oh, this Phoenicians is Semitic. And this language that's created is a Semitic language. And then they're going to tell you, but the Egyptians are not Semitic people, but they did influence their language. See, it's just a bunch of confusion. You have to realize your whole life has been a confusion to distort your history, our history.
Worked much the same way. Even Egyptian, though no Semitic language itself, is at least a distant relative of the Semitic languages, with a similar person itself, is at least a distant similar and worked much the same way. Even Egyptian, though no Semitic language itself, is at least a distant relative of the Semitic languages, with a similar personality. This consonant alphabet is being tested in easy waters.
You see how they're saying, this is an Afro-Asiatic language group and its Semitic branches off of it. Everything comes from Egypt. That's what they're trying to say. When you know everything comes from a Semitic background, which is petroglyphs and pictographs.
The consonant alphabet is being tested in easy waters, but history is shaking things up. Your merchant friend comes back for your help. She needs you to deliver your alphabet to a very different people living along her trade route. What will happen when the alphabet gets leaked outside of the family?
Word pictures. And many people isolated. Have you seen this? I see some hands just so I know how. Probably 10 years ago or so, I came across Frank Seekin's book on the Hebrew word pictures. And many people in this room, have you seen this? I see some hands just so I know how. Few people, not even half of the people. So just so I know who I'm speaking to, how many people have no idea about anything Hebrew? Probably half the people have no idea about anything Hebrew. Okay. And besides that, who knows who's going to be listening to this tape. So here's the thing. Frank Seekins is in Phoenix or Scottsdale, Arizona. And apparently, probably about 15 years ago, he discovered something in the Hebrew letters. I don't know exactly what the first letter that he discovered, but I know the most simplest one to render is the word ben is the word son. B-E-N in English, ben, bet noon in Hebrew, it's the word son. And the letter bet means a house, and the letter noon is to be living, or something that is alive that jumps out of its environment. And you could say, well, a son is one that is born, which brings life to the house, and when he grows up, he jumps out of the house and goes to make his own house. So there's this very simple picture in the Hebrew letters that bet noon is the word son, ben, and it means the life of the house that then jumps out and goes to make his own house. It's like, in a very simple way, Frank Seekin's book called Hebrew Word Pictures takes every letter of the alphabet. In Hebrew, it's aleph, bet, the first two letters. Alpha, beta is actually Greek, and then alphabet is English. So I'll try to say alphabet, because what I found is that this is strange. This is a foreign language. You know, I'm a 21st century American Christian, and so what do I care about ancient Hebrew? Well, part of the talk tonight is to show you the significance of ancient Hebrew. And what I found was I have to retrain my mind, visually, auditorially, and so this banner here, which is on this little paper that we're handing out, and again, I apologize for the quality of that. It's color Xerox, you know, and the ones that we printed up before, we've already given those away, but those were much nicer rendered, and we would like to make those available to people, but this was the best we could do at the short notice with a short budget. But anyway, to get them printed up in full color and have them laminated was the way they're originally to be presented. You know, like here's one here, which, you know, well, she's written all over it, but it's a nice little bookmarker. But the point is, I have one of these I made in an aspect of 1 foot by 3 foot, and I have it above my door, and I'm always seeing it because I put it right above a prominent door. And then you could say, well, once in a while you might sit there and stare at it and look at it, but to have it always in your visual eye, you could say it's always working on your mind. And what I found is that these, as Jamie said, these Hebrew letters are actually alive. And you could say, well, that's kind of a strange esoteric concept, but these are not just letters. These are not just scratchings of lines in the dirt. I believe, really, that these letters were designed by the creator of the universe before the creation. So this is not Christian, and this is not Jewish. That may seem strange, but we have been told, linguists have said, well, cavemen were grunting, and then they were scratching and, scratching, and everything became a meaning, and it evolved into language, and it evolved into the thousands of languages we have now. I disagree. What I believe this is, what is on this 8 hours worth of talk, which is then incorporated into the chart, which this DVD spends 4 hours explaining, which is about this, is that this alphabet, I believe, was designed by the creator as the schedule, the to-do list, before making the universe, such that the 7-day sequence of creation in Genesis, or in Hebrew Bereshit chapter 1, is mapped by the Hebrew alphabetic letters. So if you have a to-do list or a plan and you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, okay, you're going to build this building, okay, where you're first going to find the plot of land. That's number one. Number two, you're going to excavate, dig a hole, pour some concrete. Number three, you're going to set up some framing. Then you're going to put the roof on, and you got this schedule. And finally, you paint it and throw down the carpeting, and you've got the whole list. That's what the 7 days of creation are. And I found that it mapped to the Hebrew alphabet. And if the 7 days of creation mapped to the Hebrew alphabet, well, which came first, the building or the plan? Sometimes you build first and you draw the plans later, but there's, in Leviticus 23, there's a list of 7 festivals that Yahweh says to his people Israel. He said, these are my festivals. These are not Jewish holidays. Yahweh the Creator says, these are my festivals, which I am now going to give to you to regard. You can say, well, wait a minute, Moses, he didn't come up with these. David didn't dream these up. That was 500 years later. They weren't designed by Abraham. These were designed by the creator of the universe. They were his thoughts, his plans, his design. And he says, who am I going to give these to? Israel. Here, I'm going to give these to Israel through Moshe, through Moses. And again, I'm going to speak as many Hebrew words as I can, not to confuse you or not to be Judaizing, but I was told by some people that says, when you talk like that, we don't know what you're saying. The words are strange and foreign, and we don't recognize them. It's like, well, if you don't say them, they'll continue to be strange and foreign. The more we say the words, the more familiar you'll become. And like having the words above the door, the more they bear on your mind, the more you'll start to say, they work on you. Okay, so I'm going to speak the words, and by having these letters and have them on the hat is a matter of being in your consciousness, in your face, to work on you. So the point is, what I found about the 7 festivals is that they are the same mapping, the same cartography, carta, there's that word, mapping, as the 7-day sequence of creation. And this is what the 8-hour videos talk about. And then what I found was the word Mishkan, where we get the word Shekinah, or the glory cloud, really means to neighbor, to dwell with, to come, settle, and rest in the vicinity of, and to hang out together. The Mishkan, the place where you hang out together, is the word for tabernacle. And the tabernacle that Yahweh told Moshe, you make this tabernacle just like the plan, the paradigm, the model that I showed you on the mountain of the one in the heavens. You make the one on earth just like it. That pattern, which I'm referring to as the Mishkan pattern, is the exact model pattern of the 7 days of creation and the 7 festivals. Happens to also map to the 7, or the list of Beatitudes and the Lord's Prayer in the New Testament. That's a whole other matter. But the point is, these 3 things are purely of Yahweh. They're not human religion. They're not of human design. The sequence of the 7 days, if he planned out those 7 days and then put them into effect, then he had the plan of those 7 days before the 7 days, which means they came before the creation of the universe, which makes this the oldest archaeology of any. It's older than the stars. It's the oldest anywhere because it's the Creator's to-do list off his desk, as it were. So here you have the pattern of the Mishkan mapping to the pattern of the 7 days of creation, mapping just like 2 hands that look like, well, gee, those don't match, they're opposite. And it's like, oh, when you put them like this, they're exactly the same pattern. The 7 days of creation, the 7 festivals, and the Mishkan pattern are all the same. And what I then found in 2005 is that it maps to the Hebrew alphabet if you know the meanings of the letters, according to Frank Seekon's study. So if you go on, for example, to ancienthebrew.org, I believe it is, which is Jeff Benner's study, he talks about the Paleo-Hebrew, and he incorporates some stuff from Frank Seekon's, but he won't tell you about this stuff that I found, nor will Frank Seekon's, because I don't know anybody else who's found this stuff. Which is to say, if somebody disagrees, feel free to say so. But the problem with that is you have to understand this before you can disagree with me. So try to understand it, and if you can find fault, tell me where the fault is. I'm gonna come over here to this chart for the sake of the camera, and I'm gonna point this out. So because of you who don't know anything about this, if I go on about the dictionary right now, which I'd like to do without giving you a few minutes worth of telling you what I mean about this pattern sequencing, I'll have lost you. And then I'll say, well, go back and listen to the 8 hours, and then listen to the 4 hours, and then go back and finish listening to this talk. I don't want to do that to you. I'm going to point out to you briefly what I mean. And then you heard the first 6 letters of the song. The purpose of the song about the alphabet was to make it very simple. So if I tell you right now what all these letters mean, it'll be like, wow, this is... Because those of you who don't know Hebrew, or those of you who never heard of Frank Seekon's, the letter A is simply the letter A. It's a tool by which you build words. Apple, architect, author. Most of the A words, interestingly enough, have to do with the one who's the responsible authority, there's that letter again, who makes something happen because of what the letter A means. Okay, so I'm going to point out to you the pattern, and then I'll sing to you the whole song instead of just the 6 letters, and then I'm going to show you there's something we're going to run through on a PowerPoint, which Bill Sanford, who's in, I believe it's Mississippi, put together this PowerPoint revealing that each letter describes who the Messiah is. Now, wait a minute. This isn't the New Testament Messiah, Jesus Christ, because this is not Christian. This isn't necessarily the Messiah that the rabbinical Jews are expecting, because this isn't Jewish. What this is going back to the original meanings of the letters and realizing that the creator of the universe embedded in the meanings of the 22 letters from before the creation of the world, the identity of who the Mashiach, the Messiah, was going to be, but not the way we necessarily think of him. This might step outside of our paradigm of expectation. And I picture this kind of like, to use a little metaphor, it's kind of like Cinderella's slipper. The alphabet is kind of like Cinderella's slipper. And it's like, hey, here's this last slipper. Whose foot does it fit? Let's take our favorite Christ figure, our favorite avatar, our favorite prophet, our favorite special holy man, and does his foot fit? I believe that these 22 letters describe who is the real sent one, planned and determined from before the creation of the world. And I just happen to believe that it fits the foot of Yeshua. Now the question is, if you see him in the Hebrew format, designed or explained by these 22 letters, does he fit any one of the various, there's like 20-some aspect of who the Messiah is and what his doctrines and theologies are? I'm not here to step on any toes or to put anybody's beliefs down. I'm here to show you what's in the Hebrew alphabet. And then you can take what's in the Hebrew alphabet and compare it to your favorite doctrine, and if something doesn't fit, you can throw out which one you don't like. I happen to throw out the doctrines and hold on to the Hebrew alphabet because I think that the proof is the fact that the Mishkan pattern, the 7 days of creation, and the 7 festivals of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the creator of the heavens and the earth, are the supreme plumb line. As a matter of fact, the very first word of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20 happens to be the Hebrew word Anoki. Aleph, Nun, Kaf, Yod. Those letters may not mean anything to you, but later on, hopefully they will. Aleph is the letter that means I will. Nun is to impart life to. Kaf is an open hand, which is a covering, which is also, I believe, represents the words of the Torah that are written like lines of script. And the letter Yod is my, which is a possessive. So you could fit those things together, and that's just a little example of how to break down words that are spelled in Hebrew. But the word Anok is literally a plumb line. And you could say, well, where's the standard of truth? What's the standard of what's right? The true doctrine, the true principle, the true theology, the true identity of the Mashiach, the true rendering of any particular written script. Here's the plumb line. It's something you hold from the top when you're doing a building. If you want to try to find true plumb, you can hold up a level, but sometimes the bubbles are off. But if you hold up the plumb line with a weight on the bottom, here's the plumb line. And the word Anochi can be literally read as my plumb line. And I remember hearing someone say once, well, that's not my plumb line. We have all been given the grace by the Almighty to choose to believe anything we want. You can believe anything you want. You can also be wrong. You can also kill anybody you want and pay the consequences, because the commandment was thou shalt not murder. And if you choose to, that was your choice. You will pay the consequences, but you can believe anything you want. You can do anything you want, but here's the plumb line. And so my particular regard is to say, having found this plumb line, now we can say, well, is it still valid? Is it true? Is it trustworthy? Those are all subsequent questions which we can deal with, but to simply present the information so that now we have something to look to and say, wow, if this is the true plumb line, I can take every one of my favorite customs and traditions and beliefs and habits and lifestyle and compare it to the plumb line and say, how does it measure up? Which I believe is the purpose of it. So here, I will show you the pattern briefly. And again, I don't want to take the 8 hours that I took on those other DVDs, but this is just to bring you up to a certain speed of recognition. As the basic pattern, this is the Mishkan pattern down here. So I'll render this by the days of creation first. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me show you the Mishkan first, because these are drawn as pieces of the Mishkan. Here's the big white fence. Nobody was allowed into the big white fence if they were in contact with something dead. So outside the fence, in the darkness, they had to be first cleansed by the ashes of the red heifer. So the priest had to develop a red heifer with no white hairs in it, kill it, burn it, take the ashes, mix them with water, and if you were in contact with something dead, They'd sprinkle this water on you, and you could say, well, is that a ritual cleansing, or are they making some kind of a soap out of lye and somehow cleansing you? It was the instruction. So to be cleansed with the ashes of the red heifer allowed you permission to enter. You'd enter the fence. Now, on the fence, there was one door. It was pretty wide. It had 4 colors of embroidery, technically 3, blue, purple, red. And in the book of Leviticus, you'll see repeated more than 20 times. Every time it renders the color pattern, it's always blue, purple, red on white linen. Blue, purple, red, white linen. So that's why there's 4 colors. There's also some gold threads woven into the embroidery. But I was saying, is there some reason, blue, purple, red, white linen, blue, purple, red, white, blue, purple, red, white? What could this possibly mean? Hey, there's 4, blue, purple, red, white, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Gee, there's 4 letters to his name. I wonder if the colors match. That's on the chart. That's another explanation. But yes, I believe that the colors sequence, blue, purple, red, white, matches Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. That information is on the 8-hour chart. I have to move on because we're really supposed to be talking about the dictionary, but I'm just letting you know that there's stuff there. There's buried treasure here. Having come into the big white fence, it says right inside the gate is the barbecue grill, the altar of sacrifice. Immediately right inside the gate was this barbecue grill. Now, off in the distant, set-apart place, inside of which were 4 items. But halfway between the set-apart, in English it's called the holy place, it was a covered tent structure, halfway between the holy place and the barbecue grill was the laver. So that means that coming in the fence, the 2 items outside, exposed to the elements, were the barbecue grill, which is the altar of sacrifice, and the laver. Going into then the tent, the covered kadosh place, the set-apart place, the holy place, you'll find these 3 items: the menorah, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. Then there was a veil, and in what's called the kadosh kodashim, or the most holy place, or the most set-apart place, you'll find simply the Ark of the Covenant. Step outside of people's vision here. The Ark of the Covenant. When the Almighty was present in the camp of Israel, when he was present, when he was Shekinah, when he was Shekining, this is the Mishkan, it's the same word, the place of his resting, abiding, dwelling with, neighborly with, you'll have the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, which technically, a pillar of fire, like it's blazing torch. Remember, there's 2 things that it says crossed through or passed through the 2 halves of Abraham's cutting of the sacrifices. Abraham cut the animals and set the birds up, split them apart, and it says 2 things came through. But the thing is, in Hebrew, when you get the letter Vav, which is a connector, it can mean 2 aspects of one thing. You can say, okay, it says a blazing torch and a billowing furnace moved through these split animals. And you say, okay, these 2 things moved through. Who's that? Is that an allegorical picture of the Father and the Son? You say, it might be one thing that both billowed as a furnace and blazed like a torch is another way to read it in the Hebrew rendering. It turns out that this letter Kuf is our letter Q. And if something billows, it's almost like this question mark shape, this billowing, and with an exclamation point, bam, right across the top of it, pointing, the bullet point at the bottom of the question mark and exclamation point is what's at the bottom. Well, if you have this billowing smoke and this pillar of fire, boing, right over the Ark of the Covenant, it's pointing to what's in there. Any questions? Look here. And I'm saying this for a reason, which we'll get to in a few minutes. It's like this big question mark and exclamation point of any question you have in life is pointing right here to what's inside the Ark of the Covenant, which is the place of the Kadosh Kodashim. Now, that's the Mishkan pattern. Now, here's the 7 days of creation which relate to it. He started off as a status of darkness and said, let there be light. Boom, like this big white fence. If you have this big white linen fence, kind of backlit, as it were, like a lampshade, with the pillar of fire, it's glowing in the darkness of the wilderness, it's kind of a visual equivalent of, here's the darkness, let there be light. Here's the darkness of the wilderness, here's the big white fence. Can you kind of see that mapping? The barbecue grate was, they brought a sacrifice in. The first thing they did, the priest started chopping it up and separating out the pieces. Put the blood here, put the skin there, put the dung over there, put the entrails over there, put the shanks of the pieces here. It's a matter of chopping it up and separating. There was a place for washing up. This was out. We're talking about the days of creation here. I jumped back into the Mishkan. Let there be light. The second day, he separated water from water. It's a simple element of separation. The third day, again, separation. See, every day there's progressive stages of separation. He separated the light from the dark. He separated the water from the water. He separated the land from the water on day 3. But then he also spoke life, plant life, into the soil. But if you look at Genesis chapter 2, it says, but nothing had sprouted yet because the rain had not come and there was no man to work the soil. But there was a mist that went out, but nothing had sprouted yet. Bear that in mind. Bump into that later. That was day 3. Day 4, he put the sun, moon, and stars in the sky, in the place of the menorah. Day 5, table of showbread, he put the fish in the sea and the birds in the air. Picture scales, balancing scales, like the earth in the middle, right? Tipping the scales, the fish go down and the birds go up. That's a picture to render later. Day 6, altar of incense. Remember, our prayers are like incense. It has to do with communication. He made animals, and he made man on day 6. And then he set apart, now remember, the Kadosh Kodashim, the most holy place behind the veil, is the separated place where no man could ever go. They weren't even allowed to look at the Ark of the Covenant. But the high priest, one day a year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, he was to go in, sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on the ark. And if he was unfit, the wrong guy, the wrong day, the wrong attitude, he died and was dragged out. It was a sacred place. The set-apart 7th day is the Shabbat, the 7th day. The word Shabbat means the place where you go back to rest, to return, to sit. So there, the 7-day pattern fits the same basic schedule as the Mishkan. The 7 festivals. Starts off the status quo being outside the fence. The Israelites were in bondage of slavery and misery and tribulation in Egypt, the tyrannical oppressors. Yahweh said, I'm going to be your Elohim. I'm going to set you free. I'm going to take you out of Egypt, and I will give you my ways instead of you having to conform of the ways of others who are imposing their ways upon you and oppressing you with them. I'm going to be your boss. I'm going to be